The first time my daughter-in-law called me inventory, she did it with a laugh that sounded like a fork scraping china. We were at my grandson's 8th birthday party in their backyard, a windy Saturday with sagging balloons and a hired magician who kept losing his cards. I was balancing paper plates and trying to keep the candles from blowing out when Tamsin clinked her glass and said, loud enough for the other mothers to hear, "Don't worry, we've got extra chairs." We count Nora as inventory at this point. She comes with the house. It got a polite ripple of laughter the way cruelty often does when people aren't sure if it's a joke. My son, Daniel, focused on slicing cake like a man attempting surgery on a moving target. When I set down the plates, my hands felt rubbery, as if I'd been holding something too heavy for too long and forgot to let go. I'm 72, which isn't an age so much as a spotlight. Every movement is judged for creaks and hesitations. I'm not fragile. I've walked icy sidewalks at 5 in the morning to get to the municipal office when storms knocked out the grid. I spent 38 years as a city accountant in Harborfield, Massachusetts, small coastal town, big personalities, exact numbers. I balanced budgets no one believed in and found money other people swore didn't exist. But in my family, my invisible work had always been the kind that didn't come with applause. I took night shifts caring for my husband when his kidneys failed. I learned the names of every school secretary so I could swap Daniel into better schedules. I ironed ties at 6 a.m. on days there were interviews, and when I finally retired, I made it easy by never asking anyone to notice. Inventory, I said, as if testing a word in a language I didn't speak. "Oh, Mom, relax," Daniel murmured without looking up. "She's kidding." The other mothers drifted away, a few giving me that polite smile people use at wakes. I kept my gaze on the cake. Chocolate frosting, sugar roses. My fingers have always remembered numbers better than names, and I counted the slices before I cut them, not because it mattered, but because you hold on to the small precise things when the large messy ones slip through. It would have been a forgettable moment if not for what came next. After the presents were opened and the magician finally found his card, a 4 of clubs, absolutely thrilling, we moved to the patio where the adults could talk while the children yelled themselves hoarse. Tamsin placed a slim envelope beside my paper cup of lemonade, as if it were a napkin. "Housekeeping," she said brightly. "I'll need your keys back, Nora." "Both sets." "My keys?" I blinked. "Yes, we've decided to change the locks this week. Safety, you know. And it's confusing when there are extra sets." She tapped the envelope. "And here's a new schedule so you don't overlap with Lucas's tutoring when you stop by." When I stopped by, I repeated, less like a question and more like a translation. I used to live 2 blocks away from them, in the Little Cape, where Daniel took his first steps between a coffee table and the dog's water bowl. But after my husband, Mick, died almost 8 years now, I rented out the Cape to a young couple and moved into a smaller condo nearer the harbor where the gulls were always too loud and the elevator smelled of hand sanitizer, which I didn't mind. I didn't stop by. I was asked, and I showed up. There is a difference. "We've got routines, Nora," said Tamsin, that gliding voice she saves for realtors and mothers. "Lucas gets overwhelmed. It's better if we coordinate your contributions." "Mom, it's nothing," Daniel added, eyes on the patio table. "We're just trying to streamline me into something that doesn't require consideration." It had started in smaller ways, an extra group chat where plans were made without me, a family photo in which I was accidentally left out and deliberately not reshot, a joke about Stone Age budgeting when I mentioned envelopes for cash categories. But here it was in daylight, the thing that happens when you've been helpful so long people forget that you take up space. I slid the envelope toward me with one finger. Inside was a typed visitation schedule, like a parenting plan for a grandmother. Mondays 3 to 5 p.m., pickup from after school only. Thursdays 4 to 6 p.m., no dinner. Every other Saturday 10 to 12, park only, no suites. There were also bullet points, no surprise drop-ins, no extra gifts, no old-fashioned advice about money. At the bottom, a neat line, keys to be returned by Tuesday to ensure household security. I looked at Tamsin's nails, pale pink, moons of polish unbroken. She is 39, a solutions consultant at an insurance software company, and the kind of woman who can order a coffee like a negotiation. She married Daniel in a dress that cost more than my first car, and she keeps an Excel sheet of who sent what for their wedding and what to send back at their anniversaries. I never minded her efficiency. Efficiency gets things done. It's the kindness I kept not finding. And if I don't return them? I asked. I kept my voice dull as if asking about rain. Mom, Daniel breathed, but Tamsin tilted her face toward the sky, letting sun hit her cheekbones like she was in a commercial for sunscreen and boundaries. Then we'll consider other options, she said, still smiling. I'm sure you don't want things to get formal. The word formal landed like a stamp. In my life, formal means paperwork you wish you had read sooner. I gave her the keys. I don't know why. Habit, probably. My generation trusted clipboards and signatures because we believed they were guardrails. I watched the metal glint in her palm, felt something small fold in my chest, and turned back to refill the lemonade. I'm not a crier. Numbers have kept me from becoming one. You can't cry when you're checking columns for transposed digits. But the pitcher trembled lightly in my hand, and I remembered that when my husband was dying he kept apologizing for inconveniencing me, and I kept telling him to hush, 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 as if love were a schedule to be politely adjusted. The party finished itself. I stacked paper plates, collected ribbons, fished a plastic sword out of a punch bowl, the small dignities of someone pretending not to notice they're pretending not to notice. On my way out, I passed the kitchen and saw Tamsin tap her phone, face slack for a second as people's faces are when they think no one is looking, and I caught the subject line on her screen reflected in the window, pod change confirmation, Breen, Eleanor. Payable on death. The words made my scalp prickle, not because of what they were but because of who I had always been. Payable on death forms don't show up with birthday cake unless someone filed them. I walked the 11 minutes home along Harbor Street, past the bait shop where old men argued the price of clams like UN diplomats, past the library I volunteer at Tuesdays and Thursdays because books are the only rooms where people whisper to be kind, not unkind. The harbor was spattered with boats facing the same way, wind insisting. If you've lived in one place long enough, you learn where you can cry. For me, it's the bench near the bronze fisherman where the plaque says, "For those who go to sea and never truly return." I didn't cry. I sat and looked at the gulls and thought about bank forms. Here's the thing about my fear, it doesn't look dramatic. It's the small, neat fear of becoming a burden, of one day needing help in a way that makes someone sigh before they stand up. I have watched friends make their world shrink so they require less from the people around them, like polite guests at a party they were invited to by accident. I swore I would not do that. And still, I've started to carry only what I can put down quickly, started to apologize for staying too long in my son's doorway, started to say no worries when worries were all I had. My wound is not that I'm alone. I can handle alone. It's that the people I love might love me less for being complicated. That Monday, I had my usual appointment at the credit union. I do my banking on foot because it gives me a reason to leave the apartment and because faces and places can save you when paper tries to erase you. I've known Patricia at the teller window for 20 years. I brought her a casserole when her father died, and she once slipped me a coupon for free checks because I reminded her about a forgotten payroll deduction. "Hey stranger," she said, her voice warm. "You didn't come by Thursday." "I was inventory," I said. She laughed, the kind of laugh you trust. I asked to speak to a manager and felt foolish for how formal it sounded coming out of my mouth. "Is something wrong?" Patricia asked, lowering her voice. "I hope not," I told her. "I'd like to review any recent changes to my accounts, especially beneficiaries or authorizations." I smiled as if I were asking about the weather. People think banks are faceless. They aren't. They're families with fluorescent lighting. The branch manager, a woman in her 40s named Anna who carries herself like she expects complicated things to be solvable, shook my hand and led me to a glass office with a ficus that had given up. "What are we looking for?" she asked, opening a screen with my history, the numbers of my life lining up like obedient soldiers. "Payable on death forms," I said. "Anything updated since last spring?" She scrolled, frowned, then scrolled again, slower. "We have a pod change submitted 2 weeks ago for your primary savings," she said. "Beneficiary, Daniel Breen." A second line, "Contingent beneficiary, Tamsin Rosen." 2 weeks ago, I repeated, hearing my voice go careful, like my feet were on ice. "Yes," she clicked. "Submitted digitally, through our secure portal. Authorization verified via email to your address and a follow-up security question by phone." "What email?" I asked. She read it. It was my name, but not my email, an extra dot silently added between my first and last that I had never used. My heart ticked in my throat. "And what phone number?" She rattled off digits, the last 4 unfamiliar. "We also have a login from a new device the same day." Standard fraud flags didn't trigger because the street address matched, and the last paper mailer we sent this month wasn't returned. "We mailed a printed confirmation to your condo on Harbor Street." "I didn't receive a confirmation," I said. "I would have noticed." "I notice mail the way some people notice tone." Anna's brow tugged down. "Would you like to file a dispute?" "I would like to see the document they signed," I said. "And the IP address that submitted it, please. And any recorded phone verification." She looked at me for a second in a way that made me feel seen, as if she was recalibrating who I might be. "You've done this before," she said. "I kept auditors employed for 3 decades, I told her. "I know what people do when they think you won't check." Anna printed the authorization. It was my name, my address, my birth date. The signature block was a tidy digital scrawl, not so far from mine that a stranger would question it, just far enough that anyone who's watched me sign forms at a counter would tilt their head. The security question answer, my first dog, was wrong. I didn't have a first dog. Mick was allergic. My first dog was the neighbor's, and I only pretended she was mine when I wanted to pretend we were a normal family. Someone had guessed a life I didn't live and gotten close enough. "We can freeze beneficiary changes pending investigation," Anna said, fingers pausing above the keyboard. "We'll send formal notices." She glanced at me. "Is there someone who might have access to your mail?" "Possibly," I said. The word felt sour. "I'd also like to request full copies of any changes to my safe deposit access in the last 6 months. And please, if it's permitted, could I see the IP logs for those logins? I can't make heads or tails of them, but my niece can." Anna printed until the little machine ran hot. She slid the pages into a manila envelope and wrote her direct line in neat block letters. "If anyone calls asking about this, we will not discuss it without you present," she said. "I'm flagging your account so our staff knows." I swallowed something that wasn't tears. "Thank you, Anna." On the walk home, I met Mrs. Chen from 4B in the elevator, a woman in her 80s who always smells like peppermint tea and insists on giving me half her dumplings when she makes too many. "Light on your feet today, Nora," she said, pressing the button like it was a lever on a ship. "Did you see the notice?" "What notice?" "The building's notary hours posted by the mailboxes. The new concierge, Miguel, he is a notary now." "Very convenient." We stopped on the mail floor where the corkboard holds our lives up with thumbtacks. 3 things were pinned that I had not seen yesterday: a flyer about window washing, a sign-up sheet for the community room, and a bright white card, on-site notary services by appointment. "Ask Miguel at the front desk." My box held circulars and a letter from the town about the fall parking ban. And one long white envelope from Harborfield Credit Union with a faint watermark of a lighthouse, the kind you'd only notice if you knew what watermarks look like. Back upstairs at my kitchen table, a square hand-me-down whose legs never quite agreed with the floor, I opened the credit union envelope. "Dear Ms. Breen," it began, clean type pretending to be calm, "this is a courtesy confirmation of changes submitted to your payable on death, POD, designations on August 12th. Beneath it were the beneficiary names. Daniel. Contingent, Tamsin. There was a paragraph about the 30-day window to contest. The letter was dated 12 days ago. I run my life on due dates. I could feel that window closing in my bones. I laid the manila envelope beside it and looked at the ink like it might answer a question if I stared long enough. I made tea, because hot water has rescued me from all sorts of things. Then I did what I always do when the ground is moving. I pulled out an old green ledger pad left over from the municipal office. I like the grit of it. Lines that tell you where to put things so the chaos sits still. I wrote 3 columns, date, action, source, and started a log as if my life were a budget that could be balanced. August 12th, pod change submitted digitally. Email, wrong. Phone, wrong. IP, printed. August 12th, physical confirmation mailed. August 24th, I learned of change. I wrote until the page felt like a handrail. And then I made a choice that would look to some like weakness and to me like a plan. I called Daniel to ask if I could stay with them for a few days. He answered on the second ring. He works in sales for a medical supply company. His phone is an organ he can't live without. Hey, Mom. Everything okay? You need anything? I'd like to be close to Lucas for a bit, I said casually, using my grandson's name as a key that usually opened doors. The truth was I did want to be close to him, but the bigger truth was that certain legal protections kick in when a person you might want to steamroll begins to look like someone under your care. I learned that in the dull fluorescent light of elder services meetings, the ones where families pretended to be unified in front of a social worker and then went into the parking lot to stand in different corners. Sure, Mom, Daniel said, hesitating the way people do when they think their spouse will say no. We've got a busy week. I won't be in the way, I said. I'll bring dinner on Tuesday. There was a pause long enough for me to hear Tamsin in the background, the click of a cupboard, the low hum of conversation. Okay, Daniel said finally. We have tutoring Tuesday at 4. No sweets? I have never bribed your child with sugar, I said. Just saying, Mom. You know how he is. I packed my bag slowly. 3 outfits, a sweater, the worn photograph of Mick and me on our wedding day because I'm superstitious about facing rooms without people who loved me for free, and the manila envelope with the bank printouts. I didn't put them in my purse. I tucked them into the false bottom of my old knitting bag instead, the one I once used to smuggle extra sandwiches into hospital waiting rooms when the cafeteria was closed. Numbers keep you honest, but hiding places keep you safe. On my way out, I stopped at the front desk. Miguel is 25 maybe, hair like a crooked halo, and a graciousness that seems out of proportion to his job title. Mrs. Breen, he smiled, standing up. Afternoon. I saw you're a notary now, I said lightly. Busy week? Crazy, he grinned. You wouldn't believe the stuff people want stamped. I would, I said. I've seen worse. He laughed and lowered his voice the way kind people do when they want to give you information without making a fuss. I had a lady come in last week with a gift letter for a house transfer. Said it was for her mother-in-law. She was particular about dates. Didn't have ID for the other party yet, said she'd bring her later. I told her that's not how this works. He shrugged. Then she came back with the older lady, but the older lady didn't say much. I refused anyway. Something felt off. I felt my lungs forget how to do their job. Do you remember her name? I asked, as if I were asking about the weather again. She signed in as T. Rosen. He squinted as if searching for the rest. She had a real estate agent with her. Tall guy. Checked his watch a lot. The older lady, he glanced at me, then away, polite, looked tired. They seemed upset when I said no. The guy said they'd take it to a UPS store. They're more flexible, he said. A UPS store notary. Loose procedures are a con artist's weather. I pictured Tamsin's pale manicure tapping at the counter, pictured the agent with the watch, imagined a form sliding under a pen with my name already printed where I hadn't decided if it belonged. If your hands are shaking right now listening to me, I want you to know mine were too. I appreciate you, Miguel, I said. I really do. Anytime, Mrs. Breen. He looked proud in a way I needed. You're not the kind of person people should push around. At Daniel and Tamsin's, I cooked. I chose food that makes a house smell like a promise. Roasted chicken, potatoes with the edges too crisp, green beans with lemon that squeaked between your teeth. Tamsin came in at 6 in her work clothes, hair sleek as a decision. She kissed Lucas's head without looking at him and poured herself seltzer like she'd earned it. Dinner smells fine, she said. Like something better was the baseline. We're lucky to have Mom, Daniel said too quickly, a ribbon of nerves in his voice. We ate looking at our plates the way people do when they don't agree. After dinner, Lucas asked me to help with math. He is bright, generous with his worry, and he likes my stories about how numbers can hide and be found. We sat at the kitchen island while Tamsin opened her laptop and Daniel found reasons to stand and sit and stand again. I showed Lucas how to check his subtraction by adding back, a trick my father taught me when the rent was a wolf at the door and we had to feed it exact change. "Mom, we should talk," Tamsin said after Lucas had gone to brush his teeth, her voice clean and managerial. "Of course," I said, folding my hands as if they might behave if they had a job. "It's about boundaries," she began, the word like a ceremonial gong. "We love that you're involved, but we need to ensure there's no confusion around future arrangements." She softened the edges of her tone like frosting. "You've been under a lot of stress. You forget things. You show up at odd times. The school has rules, the house has rules, the bank, well, you know." "The bank," I repeated. "Yes," she said lightly. "For instance, we discovered your beneficiary designations were out of date. Daniel should be the primary. It's the simplest thing for probate. So we handled it for you." She waved a hand as if she were sweeping crumbs off a counter. "All set." "You handled it," I said, tasting the words. "We did it all online. Very easy." She stared at me as if waiting for thanks. "And the bank's phone security questions?" I asked, turning my head slightly as if it were casual. "Did you enjoy guessing my imaginary dog?" Her mouth opened, closed. It's a particular look people get when the script falls off the teleprompter. "Mom," Daniel said sharply, a warning in the syllable as if we were in church. "It's fine," Tamsin said too quickly, composition back in her spine. "We're family. Let's not make drama." She smiled at Daniel, a stage cue. I stood. Numbers firmed up under my feet like planks. "I'm tired," I said. "I'll go to bed. Please put the chicken away before it turns." In the guest room, I didn't sleep. I listened. Their voices through the vent, Tamsin's low and clipped, Daniel's stumbling. Words like guardianship and safer and mom can't keep track, and this is why we need the gift letter, Dan. And then a word that made even my sturdy old heart do something foolish, condo. I put my hand on my chest and felt it move. I had bought that condo by the harbor with Money Mick, and I saved $25 at a time from paychecks that were as tired as we were. I had put it in my name because we'd seen a friend lose everything to a nursing home bill, and we were trying to be smarter than fear. I had a will that has been reviewed every 3 years since 2012. I thought I had a life that would hold if I held it. I got up, opened the knitting bag, and pulled out the manila envelope like it was a first aid kit. I burned the first copy of Fear on the stove, watched it rise like something you offload to a sky that has seen worse. Then I put on slippers and went down the hall as if I were just a woman in the night looking for water. Daniel was loading the dishwasher by hand like someone who doesn't trust machines. He looked up, startled. "Mom, everything okay?" "I need you to tell me the truth," I said, and my voice did not tremble because I wouldn't let it. "Is there a gift letter with my name on it?" He flinched. Good people flinch when truth comes too fast. It's a formality, Mom," he said, eyes flicking to the living room where Tamsin was. "Peter says it's better to handle things now." "Peter," I said, finding the shape of the man. "Tamsin's brother-in-law. Real estate agent. Watch checker. He helps a lot of families," Daniel said, as if struggling to dress a wound that didn't want a bandage. "If the condo is in your name, it could be complicated if you need care. This way we can avoid mess." He swallowed. "You don't want mess." The kettle clicked on with a sound that, in another life, might have been comfort. "And who would own my condo after the gift?" I asked. "It would be in a family LLC," he said quickly. "It's just cleaner, Mom." "And who owns the LLC, Daniel?" I waited until he looked at me. "Please don't lie." I have been lied to so politely I can smell it before it leaves a mouth. He pressed his lips together. "We all do." "Names," I said softly. "Me, Tamsin, and Peter," he muttered, and his face had the desperate look of a boy in a principal's office explaining that his friends made him do it. "I see," I said. "There are moments when your old life and your new life look at each other like mirrors facing mirrors. You can't count the reflections, you can only choose which one to step toward." I put my hand on my son's shoulder and felt the slope of a child taller than his mother, and still somehow smaller inside. "You're my boy," I said, very quietly. "Please don't be a thief." His eyes shot up, hurt, angry, lost. I'm not, Mom. It's not like that. It is exactly like that, I said gently. But I'm tired. We'll talk later. In the morning, I dressed like I was going to a meeting. Soft blouse, cardigan that makes me look grandmotherly because sometimes camouflage is a strategy. I told them I was walking to the library. I walked to the UPS store instead. Hi, I said to the clerk, a man who looked like he eats pizza out of the box with a fork. Do you keep a notary journal here? We're a franchise, he said with a shrug that almost dislocated his shoulders. So yeah, somewhere. He flipped through a book with blue lines as if it were a catalog of things to be annoyed by. Here. Last week, gift letter. Huh. He looked up at me. You the lady? No, I said. But I'm the lady's lady. Could I see the ID copies from that appointment? Can't, he said, but not like a final no. Privacy. Of course, I said, and set my tote bag on the counter so a little folder slid out with a soft, papery sigh. It had my name on it in neat City Hall script. He glanced, reflexes trained by signage to care about official things, then slid the journal across so I could see the tiny boxes. Date, names, ID type, thumbprint. T. Rosen. P. Mahoney. E. Breen. Thumbprint. None. ID, Massachusetts driver's license numbers for T and P, and for EA Mass ID number not mine. We take prints on some transactions, he said, embarrassed by the sloppiness on the page as if he'd personally offended a law. You didn't on this one, I said, folding the shapes of letters into my mind like origami I could unfold later. Do you remember the older lady? He looked honestly apologetic. I remember the tall guy. Watch. Jang Lee Keys. Fast talker. He kept telling me they were in a rush. They were, I said, smiling like a grandmother who agrees that life is busy. I left with nothing in my hands and a lot in my head. On the corner by the pizza place, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Mrs. Breen, this is Anna from the credit union. Please call me when you can. I ducked into the shade of the awning and called. We pulled the IP logs for you, she said without preamble. The submission came from a device that had recently accessed a portal registered to a Peter Mahoney. Same IP also used to log into a real estate CRM right after your form. That's unusual. Unusual is a generous word, I said. I also found something else, she added. A letter of intent to transfer real property into a family vehicle, drafted but not executed, in the file at Harbor Field Title. Your name is on it. It wasn't signed by you. The title office manager is an old friend. She thought I should know before it moved further. I don't know what to say, I said honestly. Come by, she told me. I'll put something in an envelope for you. You didn't get this from me. She paused. It helps to have paper in your hand when you ask people to stop. At the branch, Anna didn't take me to her glass office. She led me to the break room with the humming fridge and a sign that said, "Please label your lunch." She shut the door, slid a thick envelope across the table, and rested her palm on it like someone blessing bread. Inside you'll find the pod printouts with header info, the call log showing a verification to a number you don't recognize, and a contact at Adult Protective Services, Elder Division. If you feel this is moving faster than your consent, calling them isn't weakness. It's leverage. In this state, any proposed transfer of a primary residence by someone over 65 to a caregiver or interested party can be flagged for undue influence. The investigation alone freezes a lot of foolishness. She looked me in the eye. Sometimes agreeing to need help is the smartest way to stop people from helping themselves to your life. It's strange to be seen so clearly by a stranger. I nodded, unable to trust words. I took the envelope, heavy as a choice. On my way out, Patricia at the teller window caught my sleeve. She lowered her voice and leaned toward the glass. You didn't hear it from me, she whispered, but Peter Mahoney pulled a cashier's check yesterday from an account that matches the LLC address you gave Daniel 3 months ago, Seahaven Family LLC. The memo said deposit earnest money. For what? I asked, though my stomach already knew. The listing board has a hold on a unit 2 floors above yours, she said, and her face did what honest people's faces do when they tell you something ugly. It hurt. Offer pending. Buyer, Seahaven Family LLC. They were going to buy my building from under me one unit at a time, or at least hold a piece of it with my money to force me into joining their plan. I walked outside into the clear September light, and the world looked like a spreadsheet where all the totals are wrong and you can feel it without knowing which number did it. I am not helpless. But I am not reckless either. You cannot go to war without allies, and I have spent my life being helpful instead of gathering them. Back at the condo, I slid the envelope under the false bottom of my knitting bag and opened the window to let the gulls in. I made tea again because some habits are ropes thrown across days. And then the buzzer sounded. 3 quick raps. I pressed the intercom. "Mrs. Breen?" said a voice I recognized and couldn't place at the same time. "It's Liam." "From the roof?" "The kid with the drone." "Oh, Liam. 19 now, maybe, lives with his grandmother on 7, spends weekends filming weddings and short films on a drone he treats like a pet. He once got me to wave from my balcony because it looked cinematic. I buzzed him in. He stood in my doorway with a baseball cap and a kind of sheepish determination. "I wasn't sure if I should show you this," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "But my gran says if you see something, say something, and you always say hi to her, so." He held out his phone. On the screen, a video paused on a wide-angle view of our building's parking lot, the timestamp a week old. "I was filming the sunset from the roof," he explained. "But the drone's angle caught this. I didn't even notice till I was editing." He pressed play. The video showed 2 figures near my spot. Peter's watch flashed in the last of the light. Tamsin held papers against a clipboard. Then a 3rd figure, me. Except not me. A woman close to my height with my haircut, wearing a cardigan the color of mine. She signed something on the hood of a car, and Tamsin pressed a pen into her hand again, and the woman scribbled. "That's not you, right?" Liam asked when he saw my face. "No," I said softly. "It isn't." He hesitated, eyes flicking to my kettle and back to my face. "I can send you the file. And if you need." "I don't know. People. My gran knows everyone. The church ladies. The condo board. They like you. They don't." He swallowed. "They don't like her." I held on to the back of the chair because the room had tilted half a degree. "Send me the file, please, Liam," I said. "And thank your gran for me. Tell her I'll bring scones Thursday." "She says no raisins," he said, relief breaking over his face like weather moving on. "They get in her teeth." He left as quickly as he came, and I set the phone on the table like evidence. There she was. My imposter. Signed on the hood of a sedan as the sun collapsed into the bay. The image cut through me cleanly, but somewhere under the cut there was the strange calm I used to get at the city office when the auditor brought in a red flag that, once named, we could deal with. You can fix what you can name. You can also bury people with their own paperwork if you're patient enough to get it right. I dialed a number I never thought I'd call. Elder Protective Services, intake. A woman with a voice like a teacher answered. I gave my name, my address, my fear made into sentences that didn't sound hysterical because I refused to give them that. "Do you feel unsafe today?" she asked. "I feel accelerated," I said, and she surprised me by laughing gently. "That's a word we hear more than you'd think," she said. "Hold on while I connect you to someone who can help triage." She transferred me to a caseworker named Lila, who said she'd been an oncology nurse in her other life and still believed in morphine for pain and paperwork for evil. "If you consent, we can put a temporary freeze on any property transfer while we look into undue influence," she said. "It doesn't accuse anyone of a crime. It asks for time and sunlight." "Time and sunlight," I repeated, feeling something ease. "We'll also assign a social worker to check in," she added. "It helps to have someone not related to be the bad guy in a room. You get to be the mother and the grandmother. We get to be the ones who say no." I agreed. There is power in letting a system built for you finally work for you. I never wanted to be a case number, but if being one slowed the machine grinding toward me, number me up. I was about to hang up when Lila cleared her throat. "One more thing," she said. "Do you have an attorney?" "I have a will. A sensible one. Review every 3 years," I said, "because I am who I am." "Good. But I'm asking about an elder law attorney. Someone who understands guardianship petitions, property, gifts, family vehicles, the incentives people have to be helpful." She paused. In our county, we keep a list. I'm going to email it to you. And I want you to call a woman named Martha Doyle. She used to be a prosecutor. She knows Peter Mahoney by reputation. The name slid into the room like a bright tool. I'll call her, I said. After I hung up, I stood for a long time at the window, watching clouds as if they were columns summing in the right direction. Then I did something I should have done a long time ago, even before my husband got sick and the world shrank to dialysis and good days and bad days like beads you slide along a string. I walked to the bedroom, pulled down the old shoebox at the back of the closet, and opened it. Inside was paper I hadn't wanted to face since the night we put it there, Mick's last letter to me, his half-finished plan for how to keep me safe if he couldn't. He had written the words, "If they try to make you smaller, make the room bigger." I ran my finger along his handwriting. I could hear him practicing the sentence before he wrote it so it would sound like him inside my head later. It did. I didn't sleep because sleeping would have been returning to a world where things stayed where you put them. I made a list. People to call. Policies to review. Letters to send certified with return receipt. I wrote my own name at the top and underlined it twice, not because I was likely to forget it, but because I was declaring something to myself. I would not be moved without moving something back. At 7:10 the next morning, while the gulls were arguing loudly about a bagel on the seawall and the street smelled like Tide and bakeries opening, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. A photo glowed on the screen. A scanned gift letter, your classic, undersigned, transfer property located at, with my name misspelled in one place and correct in another, a detail small enough to be a mistake, large enough to be a crack you could put a crowbar into. Beneath the photo was a line of text, "Mrs. Breen, I thought you'd want to see what crossed my desk." I'm only supposed to send this to the parties named, but my conscience is heavier than my job description. C. I stared at the initial and knew immediately who it belonged to. Claire. My niece. My sister Maeve's girl. CPA at a mid-sized firm in town. We hadn't been close. Family geography gets weird when grief builds walls where hallways used to be. But I remembered the way Claire used to sit on our living room floor when she was 12 with a calculator her father bought her for Christmas and glow when numbers made sense. The firm she worked for did work with the title office. She would have access. She would also be risking her job sending me this. Sometimes the ally you never expected steps out of the quiet like a bridge you didn't know you were walking toward. My knitting bag on the table suddenly felt like a toolkit. The envelope Anna gave me. Liam's drone video. The notary's sloppy journal. The freeze from Elder Protective. And now a niece with a conscience sharp as a pencil could be sharpened again. The room didn't tilt this time. It steadied. I typed slowly so my hands wouldn't make mistakes. Thank you, Claire. Can we talk without getting you in trouble? The typing ellipsis appeared and disappeared, a little heartbeat. Then, lunch? In my car? I'll park 2 blocks down the side street so no one from the office sees you. Today. I glanced at the clock. 10:10. That left me time to wash my hair, put on a blouse with a collar that looks like I read things before I signed them, and tuck the drone video onto a cheap thumb drive I keep for grocery lists and grandchildren photos. I added a fresh page to my log. Date. Action. Source. I wrote, Claire, gift letter scan, misspelled name, risk taken. As I reached for the kettle, my door buzzed again. Not the intercom this time. The door. The sound your body recognizes as immediate. 3 brisk knocks that sounded like someone who had never learned the difference between polite and entitled. I walked over, counted to 3 as if it were a ritual for courage, and opened. Tamsin stood there with a latte and a smile, both too hot to be friendly. Morning, she chirped. We're heading to the notary at 2. Thought I'd swing by and make sure you're dressed. The realtor booked a slot. I looked at her for a long time. Then I smiled in a way that only looks like surrender if you've never seen a ledger turn from red to black, because someone decided to do the math. Wonderful, I said, my voice so sweet she squinted. 2 is perfect. I'll be ready. She blinked, wrong-footed by the lack of fight. Good. Great. See? Teamwork. She lifted the latte as if toasting a deal. We'll make this smooth. We will, I said, and closed the door gently enough to make a point. I leaned my forehead against the wood for a breath, then straightened. Agreeing to be a burden, Anna had said, could be leverage. Agreeing to be available at 2 could be a trap set by me around theirs. There are rules to this world, and one of them is that documents like to be watched. I packed my bag like a soldier. Thumb drive. Envelope. Notary flyer from the corkboard. My old municipal ID that I never returned because no one asked. A pen. I put on my coat, the one with the dignified collar, and whispered to Mick that I might finally be making the room bigger. The gulls outside screamed like an alarm clock for the stubborn. At 1:55, I was going to stand at a counter while people who love me tried to put my name on paper like a sticker you can peel off. But at 11:30, I was going to meet my niece, who had just sent me a document she could lose her job for. And somewhere in the building, there was a young concierge who had refused to notarize a lie, and above us there was a boy with a drone who had accidentally filmed the truth. Sometimes you don't have to be strong. You just have to be the person who tells the right story at the right desk. I checked my watch, which does not flash like Peter's, and headed for the elevator. The doors opened. Miguel looked up from his clipboard. "Good luck, Mrs. Breen," he said softly, as if he knew luck was only part of it. "Thank you," I whispered back. "I might need a witness at 2 o'clock. For you?" he said, straightening like a man offered a uniform. "I'll bring my stamp." The elevator doors closed on his grin. When they opened again, I stepped out into the lobby and the day snapped into place like a cover sheet over a stack of exhibits. Out on the sidewalk, a gull dropped a shell on the curb with forensic precision. I walked past it without flinching. I had people to meet and paper to collect and a very polite ambush to attend. At 12:05, I slid into the passenger seat of a gray sedan 2 blocks off Main and found Claire already there, eyes bright with fear and focus, a stack of files between us like a shared secret. She took a breath as if about to jump into cold water. "Aunt Nora," she said, voice low but steady, "you need to see what they filed yesterday afternoon. And you need to promise me you're going to let me be the one who hands it to the judge when the time comes." The guardianship petition lay between us, the top page clipped neatly as if order could disguise the violence beneath it. My niece's hands were steady, but her jaw was tight. She had the same habit as her mother, my sister Maeve. When something weighed on her, she pressed her tongue to her back teeth until her cheek dimpled. I hadn't seen that in years, and here it was again, in a car parked 2 blocks off Main, with documents that spelled my future in someone else's pen. "I'm sorry, Aunt Nora," Claire said, eyes flicking between me and the folder. "I should have brought this sooner, but I wanted to be sure I wasn't misreading." She pulled out the petition and tapped the section header. "This is a filing for a temporary guardianship due to alleged diminished capacity. They're claiming you're unable to manage your affairs and at risk of exploitation." She looked at me, her voice dropping. "They're asking the court to appoint Daniel as your guardian, with authority over your financial accounts and your property." I looked at the line where my son's name appeared in black ink. His signature sat beside it, familiar in its hurried slope, the same one he used on birthday cards when he wanted to get back to his laptop. I remembered teaching him how to write his name when he was 6, his hand clumsy over the paper, my hand guiding his. Now here it was on a paper that wanted to take me apart. I kept my voice level. "What evidence are they submitting?" Claire pulled out another document, thinner. "An affidavit from Tamsin describing erratic behavior and confusion about financial matters." She tapped again. "They cite you showing up unannounced, misplacing mail, and relying heavily on family for meals and errands. They also attached what looks like a bank statement, but the balances don't match what you showed me on your log. They've highlighted unusual withdrawals." She slid the page closer. "I think they've manipulated this. Maybe partial screenshots, or maybe they used the alternate login with that fake email." I leaned closer, reading each line as if it were a column that refused to balance. The numbers were wrong. I could prove they were wrong. But in a courtroom, papers like this were meant to make people nod before they thought. I asked, "When is the hearing?" "Next Friday," she said. "It's marked as an emergency petition, so the judge can appoint a temporary guardian right away if he thinks you're at risk. You'd have to fight to reverse it later. And by then, they could move assets or lock you out." "Who drafted this?" I asked, though I knew the answer before she said it. Peter Mahoney. He filed it through his firm's attorney of record, but the fingerprints are his. She sighed, lowering her voice further. Aunt Nora, if you hadn't asked me to check that gift letter, I might not have caught this in time. Once this goes to a judge without opposition, it's very hard to undo. I took a long breath. Numbers have always calmed me. I counted to 5 in my head before speaking. What do I need to do, Claire? She reached for another sheet. First, you need representation. Martha Doyle. I called her this morning after I saw this. She agreed to meet you tonight. Second, keep your log. Judges like contemporaneous notes. They show clarity. Third, do not confront Daniel or Tamsin directly about this. If they think you know, they'll accelerate their actions. She pressed the folder shut. We have a week, but it's a narrow week. If you consent, I'll testify. I can explain what I saw in the filings, how I know the numbers were manipulated. But it's risky for me professionally. I put my hand over hers, the way my mother used to when she wanted to end an argument without raising her voice. You don't have to decide that now. I'm not asking you to lose your career for me. But I won't forget that you sat here and showed me what others wanted hidden. She swallowed, her throat tight, then nodded. We'll meet Martha tonight. She's tough, Aunt Nora. You'll like her. The car hummed with silence as we both absorbed what it meant. A guardianship petition is not paperwork. It's a declaration that you are no longer the authority of your own life. It makes you a dependent, and dependents get managed. My greatest fear, becoming a burden, was not only being realized, it was being weaponized against me. The irony almost made me laugh. Instead, I closed the folder, thanked Claire, and told her I would see her at 6 outside the law office on Broad Street. She gripped my hand once before I left the car, the kind of grip that says someone remembers you from when they were small. The hours between then and 6 stretched thin. I walked back to my condo slowly, stopping at the corner store for milk I didn't need, just to look normal. Inside the building, Miguel nodded at me from the desk. He must have seen something in my face, because he asked quietly, "Everything all right, Mrs. Breen?" "I've been better," I said. "But I'll manage." "Thank you." "If you need me to witness anything this afternoon," he added in the same low tone, "I'll be on shift till 8. That offer sat in my chest like a lifeline. I went upstairs, made tea, and pulled out the drone video Liam had sent. Watching it again, I studied the woman playing me. The cardigan was the same shade as mine, but it hung looser, the sleeves too long. Her hair was close to my style, but not as neatly cut. A hired stand-in, someone who could pass in bad light, someone they thought no one would examine. I paused the video where she signed. Her signature bore no resemblance to mine. That alone could matter if a judge saw it. I added to my log, drone video, duplicate impersonator signing forms. Evidence of fraud. I underlined it. Then I tucked the drive back into the knitting bag. Everything I had now was evidence. And evidence has weight when spoken aloud at the right time. At 5:30, I walked to Broad Street. The law office was a converted colonial with dark green shutters and brass handles that had been polished by decades of nervous hands. Claire was already there, waiting on the steps, her briefcase clutched close. "She's expecting us," she said. Inside, the receptionist ushered us to a wood-paneled conference room with shelves of binders that looked heavy enough to anchor ships. Martha Doyle entered like someone who didn't apologize for being late because she never was. Mid-60s, hair cut short, glasses on a chain, a suit that looked worn in the way good shoes are. She shook my hand firmly. "Mrs. Breen, I've heard about you." "Former city accountant, yes?" "That's right," I said. "Harbor Field, 38 years. "Good," she said, sitting. "That means you understand numbers, procedures, and the way people lie when they think forms will protect them. Let's get to it." She opened a folder of her own. "I've reviewed the petition. It's flimsy, but judges sometimes act quickly on flimsy when family waves words like confusion and safety. Our job is to show clarity, evidence of self-management, and motive for fraud on their part." She looked directly at me. "Can you testify without wavering?" "I can," I said. "I've kept logs. I have bank records, IP addresses, a fraudulent notary attempt, a drone video of an imposter signing. And I have witnesses if they're willing." Claire, Miguel at my building, maybe even the drone operator if needed. Martha's eyes sharpened. That's more than most of my clients ever have. Good. We'll also request discovery on their LLC, Sea Haven family. If we can show financial motive, earnest money, pending property acquisitions, it strengthens our case. Judges dislike guardianship being used as a smokescreen for theft. Claire spoke then, her voice careful. I can testify that I saw manipulated financials in the petition. They don't match the true balances. And I can confirm that a gift letter with Nora's name was submitted improperly. Martha nodded. That helps. But understand the risk, Claire. If your firm discovers you disclosed client files, they'll retaliate. I know, Claire said. I'll take the risk. Martha leaned back. All right. We'll prepare affidavits tonight. Nora, you'll also need a medical statement of capacity. Judges like doctors more than accountants. Do you have a primary care physician? Dr. Levin, I said. He's known me for 20 years. I'll contact him, Martha said. We'll need a quick evaluation, something to certify you're fully competent. I'll arrange it for tomorrow morning. In the meantime, keep everything you have safe. Do not leave documents unattended. And if they confront you before Friday, do not argue. Let them think you're compliant. It makes exposure cleaner. Her words hit something deep in me. I nodded. I can do that. She closed the folder with a decisive snap. Then we'll see them in court. And Mrs. Breen, be ready for them to double down. People who commit this kind of fraud rarely stop halfway. When we left, the air outside felt sharper. Claire hugged me quickly before heading back to her office, muttering about plausible deniability. I walked home with my coat tight around me, the drone video and affidavits swirling in my head. In the lobby, Miguel lifted his chin in greeting. All set? For now, I said. But Friday will be loud. That night, I lay in the guest bed at Daniel's house because I knew staying close gave me leverage, just as Anna had said. Tamsin knocked once before opening the door without waiting. How was your walk? She asked, voice neutral but eyes scanning my face. Peaceful, I said. I stopped at the library. Nothing unusual. She smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Good. Rest well. Big week ahead. When she closed the door, I let out the breath I'd been holding. In the dark, I heard Daniel's footsteps pass the hallway, then pause. For a moment, I thought he might knock too. He didn't. He kept walking. I stared at the ceiling and rehearsed the truth in my head like a speech. Each detail, each number, each witness. I knew what I had to do. But I also knew that between now and Friday, they would not sit quietly. They would push. And the next push might come before morning. The text glared at me in the gray light of morning, its words as final as a gavel. The condo deed has been filed for transfer. Effective today. I sat up slowly, the phone cold in my hand, my body stiff from a night of shallow sleep. I read it 3 times to make sure my eyes weren't misfiring. The condo, my condo, wasn't supposed to be touchable until after the guardianship hearing. They had found a way to push it forward sooner. I rose from the bed, pulled on yesterday's cardigan, and went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. When I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back wasn't frightened. She was calculating. I had seen too many people try to cook the books in my working years to be surprised when someone found a shortcut. But shortcuts leave marks, and I knew where to look for them. Downstairs, the house was quiet. Daniel was in the shower. Tamsin's laptop bag sat on the kitchen counter, neatly zipped, a coffee tumbler standing beside it. Lucas's school shoes lay by the back door. I poured water into the kettle and set it on the stove, my hands steady because they had to be. I pulled out my ledger pad and wrote the message down, with the time and the number it came from. Then I called Martha, knowing it was early but also knowing time mattered now. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp even at 7 in the morning. I told her what I'd received, word for word. That is impossible without fraud, she said. Property transfers require either notarized consent or a valid power of attorney. You signed neither. Someone forged or manipulated the filing. Do not panic. Bring me the message. We'll verify with the Registry of Deeds today. If it's real, we'll file an emergency injunction. She paused, then added firmly, do not let Daniel or Tamsin know you are aware yet. Let them keep showing their hands. I understand, I said, and my voice sounded firmer than I expected. I hung up, poured tea, and took a slow sip. Tamsin came down the stairs just as I set the cup on the table. She was in heels already, her blouse sharp, her hair perfect. She glanced at me and smiled as if she had rehearsed it. "Morning, Nora," she said. "Rough night?" "Nothing I couldn't handle," I answered. "Do you want toast?" She hesitated a second too long before answering. "I'll grab something later. We have appointments today." Busy. Appointments. The word clung. She reached for her tumbler, gave me a polite nod, and left through the garage. Daniel followed 10 minutes later, tie crooked, eyes tired. He kissed the top of my head like a son who thought small gestures could cancel large betrayals. "Don't forget Lucas has soccer tonight," he said. "He'll want you there." "I'll be there," I said, though I knew where I really needed to be was the law office and the registry. He left, and the house quieted again. I finished my tea, packed the knitting bag with my envelope, the thumb drive, my log, and the printed guardianship petition Claire had shown me. Then I walked to the bus stop instead of calling a cab, because I wanted no trail of sudden expenditures. At the Registry of Deeds, the clerk was a man in his 60s with half-moon glasses and a habit of tapping his pen while the computer loaded. "Name?" he asked. "Eleanor Nora Breen," I said, giving the address of the condo. He typed, frowned, typed again. There was a filing yesterday afternoon. Transfer of ownership from Nora Breen to Seahaven Family LLC. Consideration $0. The instrument indicates it's a gift deed. Recorded at 3:42 p.m. He printed a copy and slid it across. My name sat there in typed black, followed by a digital scrawl I had never made. The notary seal came from a UPS store, signed by a name I didn't recognize. My stomach tightened, but I leaned forward calmly. "May I have a certified copy? And the notary information." He nodded, stamped the paper, and added a sheet listing the notary's credentials. When I left, I called Martha again. "It's real," I said. "Filed yesterday at 3:42. Notary from a UPS store." "Then we go to court today," she replied. "I'll draft the injunction and meet you at the courthouse at noon. Bring the certified copy. Bring every scrap of evidence you have. This is not just about fraud anymore, it's theft." I took the bus back, stopped at the condo to gather my mail, and found a letter from Seahaven Family LLC already in my box. It stated that, pursuant to recent transfer, future correspondence regarding the unit should be directed to their office. It was dated yesterday. They hadn't even waited a day before acting like owners. I slid it into the knitting bag without opening it further. At noon, I met Martha at the courthouse. She had already prepared a motion for emergency injunction, stapled thick, citing undue influence, fraudulent notarization, and lack of consideration. She spoke to the clerk with the authority of someone who had done this 100 times. We were granted a same-day hearing in front of Judge Hartwell, known in town for being strict about procedure. When our case was called, I stepped forward, the knitting bag at my side, and took my seat. Martha spoke first, laying out the facts crisply. The fraudulent guardianship petition, the manipulated bank records, the drone video, the imposter, and now the condo deed filed without consent. She placed the certified copy on the judge's bench, along with the notary information. Then she nodded at me. "Mrs. Breen is here to testify." The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Breen, can you state clearly for the record whether you signed this deed?" "I did not," I said firmly. "That is not my signature. I was not present at the notary. I was at home the entire afternoon. I have evidence that another individual posed as me in the parking lot of my building to sign documents. I have a video. I also have bank records showing unauthorized changes to my accounts and logs I have kept of every irregularity." I slid the thumb drive forward. The clerk loaded the drone video onto the screen. The judge leaned forward as the footage played, showing Tamsin, Peter, and the imposter signing on the hood of a car. He froze the frame and stared for a long moment. "That is not you, Mrs. Breen?" "It is not," I said. "I am here before you. That woman is a stand-in. They used her to push through this fraudulent deed." Judge Hartwell looked to the notary information, then back to the deed. "This signature is unacceptable," he said finally. Motion for emergency injunction is granted. The transfer is frozen pending investigation. Seahaven Family LLC is prohibited from disposing of or encumbering the property until this court issues further order. Martha gave a single nod, satisfied. Thank you, Your Honor. The judge added, furthermore, given the evidence presented, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation. Fraudulent conveyance of property is a felony in this state. I felt something loosen in my chest, but I did not smile. I kept my face calm. Daniel and Tamsin weren't in the room, but I knew the news would reach them before evening. When the order was signed, Martha handed me a copy and told me to keep it with me at all times. You may need to show this if they attempt to press further, she said. Afterward, she walked me out into the sunlight. This was a critical win, she told me. But they won't stop. They'll escalate until exposure is total. We'll need to be ready Friday. Make sure your allies are lined up. Claire, Miguel, Liam. I'll subpoena the UPS notary if necessary. And Daniel will be forced to answer for his role in the guardianship petition. I thanked her, went back to Daniel's house for the evening, and prepared myself for the storm. When I arrived, Tamsin was already waiting, her face tight. She held up a letter, the same one from Seahaven Family LLC that I had received. We got this too, she said. Looks like the condo is under new management. Convenient, isn't it? I met her eyes without blinking. Convenient for whom? She smirked faintly, then turned away. Dinner's at 7. Don't be late. I went upstairs to the guest room, pulled the injunction order from my bag, and laid it flat on the bedspread. The court had frozen the theft, but the guardianship petition still loomed. I knew Friday would be the battlefield. I also knew Tamsin would not expect me to be ready. That night, after Lucas was asleep, I overheard them arguing downstairs. Daniel's voice, sharp and panicked. She knows, Tam. This is blowing up. Hartwell froze it. We can't move the condo. Relax, she snapped back. Guardianship will fix everything. Once we have that, her consent doesn't matter. We'll have control legally. What if the judge denies it? Daniel asked. What if? Then we try another angle, she interrupted. But we don't stop now. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Their voices carried up through the vents, each word a weight I wrote down later in my log. They thought guardianship was their last weapon. I would make sure it turned into their undoing. The subpoena lay heavy in my lap, the pages formal and cold, listing my own name as if I were both defendant and witness. Guardianship of Eleanor Nora Breen. Petitioner, Daniel Breen. Supporting witness, Tamsin Rosen. The language was simple and merciless. It called me to appear at the probate court Friday at 9 in the morning. It warned that failure to attend could result in a default judgment. It bore the state seal, and beneath it, the judge's signature. No matter how many years I spent in city offices, no matter how many forms I saw pass across desks, that seal still had the power to make my throat tighten. But I did not let myself dwell on fear. I had already rehearsed too many times how people can manipulate procedures when no one checks their work. This time, I would be the one to check. I called Martha as soon as the house emptied out, Daniel at work, Tamsin at her office. She answered quickly, and I read the subpoena aloud. She was not surprised. This is standard, she said, her voice calm. They want you on the stand. They will try to provoke you into hesitation, into looking confused, into admitting dependency. That is why you must be steady. We will present your evidence first. We will show fraud. We will show motive. You will not be the one on trial, no matter how they phrase the questions. We will make this guardianship petition collapse under its own weight. I'll be ready, I said. Good. I've spoken with your physician. Dr. Levin will attend with a signed statement affirming your full mental capacity. Judges take that seriously. Claire has also confirmed her willingness to testify. And I have subpoenaed the UPS notary whose seal appears on the fraudulent deed. He may not realize what he was part of, but his record-keeping will be key. Bring your log, your injunction order, the drone video, everything. We will need to overwhelm them with clarity. I thanked her and hung up. The days until Friday passed slowly, each hour deliberate. I moved between Daniel's house and my condo, keeping my documents with me at all times. Miguel offered quiet encouragement each evening when I checked my mail. Mrs. Chin from 4B pressed dumplings into my hand and whispered, "Don't let them push you. The building knows." Even Liam knocked once to assure me he had saved multiple backups of the drone footage. These small acts gathered around me like a wall, not dramatic but solid. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in a navy suit I had kept since my retirement ceremony. It was simple, professional, not grandmotherly. I packed the knitting bag once more, every folder stacked in order. When I arrived at the courthouse, the air was already heavy with voices. Families filled the hall, some anxious, some resigned. I signed in at the clerk's desk, then joined Martha and Claire in the waiting area. Claire looked pale but determined. She carried her own briefcase, tight in her grip. Martha looked as calm as ever, flipping through her notes. "Remember," she said to me, "they will try to make you appear small. You must answer each question with the same calm precision you used in your job. You are not confused. You are not dependent. You are competent and you are aware of their motives." When the bailiff called our case, we entered the courtroom. Daniel and Tamsin were already seated at their table, Peter behind them. Daniel's shoulders hunched, his hands restless. Tamsin, by contrast, sat upright, eyes fixed on the judge, her expression composed. Peter leaned back with his arms crossed, his watch catching the light as though reminding everyone of the time. I took my seat beside Martha, placed the knitting bag at my feet, and folded my hands in my lap. The judge entered, and the hearing began. Daniel spoke first, his voice unsteady but practiced. He told the judge that he loved his mother, that he worried about her, that she was increasingly forgetful, prone to confusion with her finances, unable to manage the responsibilities of homeownership. He pointed to the bank statement included in the petition. He described me as vulnerable, at risk of being exploited. Tamsin then took her turn, her tone smooth. She described instances of me arriving at their home without notice, of confusing dates and times, of offering advice that she called outdated and impractical. She emphasized that they only wanted to ensure my safety, that guardianship would allow them to protect me. When she finished, she folded her hands neatly, her nails immaculate, her face calm. It was a performance, and she played it well. Then it was our turn. Martha rose, her voice firm. She began by presenting the injunction order, proof that the attempted transfer of my condo had already been frozen by this court due to evidence of fraud. She played the drone video, the imposter signing documents with Tamsin and Peter present. She introduced the certified copy of the fraudulent deed, with my forged signature and the notary seal from the UPS store. She called the notary himself, who admitted under questioning that he had notarized without proper identification, that he had relied on papers presented by Peter Mahoney, that he had not verified the signature against mine. His discomfort was visible, and the judge made a note. Next, Martha called Claire. My niece took the stand, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She testified that she had seen altered financial documents in the petition, that the balances presented did not match the actual accounts, that she had direct knowledge of the discrepancies. She explained how the fake email had been used to submit changes, how the phone verification had gone to an unfamiliar number. Her voice shook at first, but steadied as she went on. She told the court that she believed the petition for guardianship was not about my safety, but about gaining control of assets. Daniel shifted in his seat as she spoke, his face pale. Tamsin kept her composure, but her jaw tightened. Then Martha called Dr. Levin. He testified that he had seen me regularly for 20 years, that I was fully competent, that I managed my own care and decisions. He presented his written statement, signed and notarized. The judge read it carefully. And finally, Martha called me. I walked to the stand, my steps measured, my hands steady. I swore the oath and sat. Martha asked me to describe my life, my routines, my work history. I spoke clearly of my 38 years as a city accountant, my volunteer work at the library, my daily banking habits. I explained how I discovered the changes to my accounts, how I requested records, how I kept a log of every irregularity. I described the moment Miguel told me about the attempted gift letter, the drone footage, the fraudulent deed. I did not embellish. I did not dramatize. I answered each question plainly. When Martha asked if I believed I was capable of managing my affairs, I said, yes. I manage them daily. I balance my own records. I pay my own bills. I track my own accounts. I am here because others have attempted to remove my control for their benefit, not because I have lost it. Then it was Daniel's attorney's turn. He asked me rapid questions, trying to confuse me. What day had I first seen the bank changes? What time had I received the message about the condo? How much was the balance of my savings account on August 12th? I answered each one calmly, from my log, from memory. The judge watched closely. When the attorney asked if I had ever forgotten an appointment or misplaced mail, I admitted, of course. Everyone misplaces mail. But forgetting once does not make one incompetent. That is not confusion, that is being human. Finally, Tamsin's attorney asked if I had ever relied on Daniel and Tamsin for meals, transportation, or errands. I said, I share meals with them when invited, but I purchase and prepare my own. I drive myself or take public transit. I ask for help when it is practical, not because I am incapable. There is a difference between interdependence and guardianship. Guardianship is control. Interdependence is family. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Breen, do you believe your son and daughter-in-law are acting in your best interest? I looked directly at Daniel, then at Tamsin, then back to the judge. No. I believe they are acting in their own financial interest. I believe the guardianship petition is a tool to gain control of my assets. I do not believe they filed this to protect me. I believe they filed it to erase me from decisions I am still fully capable of making. The courtroom was silent. The judge sat back, his expression unreadable. He called a recess. We waited in the hall, the tension sharp. Daniel paced, his hands shaking. Tamsin whispered to Peter, her voice clipped. Claire sat beside me, squeezing my hand. Martha reviewed her notes calmly, as if nothing could shake her. When we returned, the judge delivered his ruling. He denied the guardianship petition. He stated that the evidence showed I was fully competent, that the petition was not supported by fact, and that there was credible evidence of financial manipulation and fraud by the petitioners. He ordered that the matter be referred to the district attorney for further investigation. He declared that Daniel and Tamsin were barred from making further changes to my accounts or property without my explicit written consent. His voice was firm. This court will not permit guardianship to be used as a weapon for personal gain. Daniel's face crumpled as the words landed. Tamsin sat stiff, her eyes fixed on the bench, her jaw locked. Peter muttered something under his breath, but the bailiff shot him a warning look. I sat still, listening carefully, committing every word to memory. The gavel struck once, and the hearing ended. We filed out into the corridor. Daniel stopped me, his eyes wet. Mom, I never meant, he began, but I held up a hand. Not now, Daniel, I said. Not here. Tamsin tried to step forward, but Martha blocked her with a single move of her arm. Not a word, she said coldly. You've said enough. The district attorney led us into a small interview room with a table, 4 chairs, and a recorder the size of a brick. He introduced himself as David Carr and introduced the investigator with him, a woman named Ruth Patel who held a notebook and a calm expression. He set the folder on the table and looked at me directly. Mrs. Breen, I want to be respectful of your time. The judge referred this matter to us because he believes there is credible evidence of criminal conduct. Before we open a case, I want to understand the full sequence. I also want to understand who besides your son and daughter-in-law had active roles. I placed my knitting bag on the table and took out my log, the certified deed, the injunction, the drone drive, and the list of contacts. I slid them across one at a time and spoke the dates and details as if I were reading a budget aloud. I did not rush. I described the first sign at the party, the envelope with the visitation schedule and the request for keys, the credit union visit with Anna, the wrong email, the wrong phone, the printed letter with the lighthouse watermark, the concierge refusing to notarize, the UPS journal with missing thumbprints, the drone video, The gift letter with my name spelled 2 ways, the guardianship petition, the injunction, and the court ruling. I gave names when I had them and said unknown when I did not. I handed over copies of everything and kept the originals in a separate folder because I've learned never to leave myself empty. Ruth asked specific questions, the kind auditors ask when they already know part of the answer. Do you have the exact time the digital pod change was submitted? Do you have the call log for the verification? Were there any attempts to deliver certified mail that you missed? Did anyone besides Mr. Mahoney and Ms. Rosen benefit directly from the Sea Haven LLC? I answered from my notes. Investigator Patel wrote quickly, nodding when my answers matched what she expected. The district attorney watched me as I spoke, then turned to Claire and asked how she came to see the altered financials. Claire took a breath, squared her shoulders, and said the truth, including the risk to her job. He thanked her formally and said he would do what he could to protect her as a whistleblower, although he could not promise outcomes in civil employment matters. He then asked Martha for her assessment. She gave it without flourish: forged deed, fraudulent notarization, attempted unlawful conveyance of a primary residence, guardianship petition used as a cover for asset control, and coordination between parties for personal financial benefit. He closed the folder. I am opening a case file today. We will begin by securing warrants for digital records tied to the Sea Haven LLC, the UPS Notary's Journal, and any devices used to submit the changes to your bank and the registry. We will also speak with the concierge who declined to notarize and the drone operator who filmed the parking lot. The video is strong. The notary's failure is significant. Combined with the injunction and the guardianship denial, it forms a clear picture. This will not be fast, but it will be thorough. In the meantime, if you are approached by any of the parties, direct them to me. Do not engage. Martha thanked him. I said I understood and shook his hand. His grip was firm, his eyes steady. I walked out into the corridor with Claire and Martha, and for the first time in a week my shoulders dropped slightly. It was not over. It was not even close. But something official had shifted. It is one thing to keep a personal log. It is another to hand that log to a person with authority and watch him treat it as evidence. Outside the courthouse, the air felt ordinary in a way I had missed. I told Claire to go back to work and not to linger in hallways that might have eyes. She hugged me once and left quickly, her briefcase tight in her hand. Martha told me to rest if I could, to keep my phone close, and to expect calls. She would schedule a follow-up with Dr. Levin for the civil side of the case, to prepare for any appeal Daniel's attorney might file. She asked me if I wanted her to call Daniel on my behalf and establish boundaries immediately. I said yes. That evening, the calls began. The district attorney's investigator spoke with Miguel, who agreed to provide his refusal notes and confirmed that a woman matching Tamsin's description had attempted to notarize a gift letter without the named party present. He remembered the date and provided the sign-in sheet. He sounded proud when he told me he had kept a copy of the flyer he gave them about proper procedure. Next, the DA's office called Liam and requested the original drone footage with metadata. Liam's grandmother answered when they first called and then yelled down the hallway for him in a way that made me smile despite myself. He delivered the footage to the DA on a thumb drive and kept 2 backups at home because he had listened to me about redundancy. Anna from the credit union sent a secure file of the IP logs, the alternate email, and the call verification table. She also sent a memo she had written that morning documenting a call from Peter Mahoney complaining loudly to the branch manager about delays with a cashier's check. The memo had times, names, and the exact words he used. These details accumulate in a way that cannot easily be undone, and I could feel the DA's case building in layers. 2 days later, the DA's office executed a search warrant on Peter's office. I did not see it, but people in Harborfield talk, and the story reached me by afternoon. According to a neighbor in his building who shops at the same grocer I do, agents carried out 2 towers of file boxes and 3 desktop computers. They also visited the UPS store and retrieved the notary's journal and the security footage from the day the fraudulent deed was processed. When I heard that last part, I sat down at my kitchen table because my knees threatened to give out. If that footage showed my imposter and Peter and Tamsin walking in with my deed, the case would not be about his word against mine. It would be about images and timestamps. Numbers and images do not stutter when a lawyer asks them to. They sit on a screen and refuse to interpret themselves any other way. By the end of the week, the DA called to inform me he was filing charges, attempted larceny over $1,200, identity fraud, uttering a false instrument, and conspiracy. The notary faced charges for improper notarization. The guardianship petition itself was cited in the narrative as part of the scheme to obtain control of my assets. He asked if I would be willing to make a formal victim impact statement for the sentencing phase if it came to that. I said yes. I also asked about Daniel. He paused before answering. Mrs. Breen, your son's name is on the guardianship petition. The evidence we have about the deed and the financial manipulation appears to center on Ms. Rosen and Mr. Mahoney. It is not my role to speak to family dynamics, but based on what we have today, Daniel's exposure is in the guardianship petition. That is a civil matter already resolved. If further evidence shows he conspired in the criminal acts, we will proceed accordingly. If not, our focus remains on those who coordinated the fraudulent conveyance and identity abuse. I thanked him for the clarity and hung up. I then called Martha and asked her to set a meeting with Daniel at her office. If there was going to be any form of apology or coordination about future boundaries, it would happen with the lawyer present. She agreed and set it for the following Tuesday. Before that meeting, something else unfolded that I did not expect. The condo board scheduled an emergency meeting for residents to discuss recent events. They posted a notice in the lobby and sent an email. The subject line was plain: resident safety and notary practices, emergency session. I attended out of respect for the building and also because sometimes the court of community does quiet work that matters. The room was full. People I only nodded to in the elevator stood up and spoke like we were neighbors again, not just bodies sharing a hall. Mrs. Chen took the floor first and announced, in her steady voice, that her dumplings were available for anyone who needed food during long days, and that people who had the habit of pressuring elderly residents should rethink their habits now. The room laughed, and the tension eased. Miguel presented a short list of procedures for notarization in the building, clear and firm, and the board voted to adopt them. They also voted to require 2 forms of ID for any building business involving keys or access permissions. I asked, "May I say something?" and the chair nodded. I stood and said that notaries and forms are tools, not weapons. We should treat them that way. I thanked Miguel and the board for acting quickly. People clapped. I did not know what to do with the sound except to sit down and write in my log that the building had decided to hold itself a little tighter. At Martha's office on Tuesday, Daniel arrived alone and looked like he hadn't slept. He sat across from me and clasped his hands together in a way he used to when he wanted to ask for allowance in advance. Martha set the terms. This conversation is for the purpose of establishing future boundaries and addressing any immediate concerns without compromising ongoing criminal proceedings, she said. It is not a forum for confession. If you wish to make statements about the criminal case, we will stop and call the DA. Daniel nodded and swallowed. He turned to me. Mom, I don't know how to say any of this without sounding like I'm making excuses, he began. I knew about the guardianship petition. I thought it would be a way to simplify things. I didn't know about the deed until after it happened. I didn't know about the imposter. He paused, eyes red. I let Tamsin and Peter talk me into things I didn't understand because I thought they were smarter about these things. I told myself it was for your safety. It wasn't. It was easier to believe their plan than to listen to you. That's on me. I stared at his face and saw the boy who used to bring me dandelions in folded paper cups from the schoolyard. Then I saw the man who had signed a petition to take my decisions. Both were true. I kept my voice level. Daniel, I am going to set this out plainly. There will be no guardianship. There will be no transfers of property without my consent. You will not access my accounts. All communication about my finances will go through Martha. If you wish to see me, you may call and ask. You may not turn up unannounced with forms. If you wish to rebuild trust, you will attend counseling and a financial literacy course for caregivers that Martha will recommend. You will not discuss this case with Lucas. You will answer his questions about why I did not come over for a time with the truth appropriate for a child. Adults made mistakes and are working to fix them. If at any point you attempt to test these boundaries, we will reduce contact further. He nodded quickly, tears rolling now, hands shaking. I agree. I will do all of that. I want to fix this. You cannot fix it, I said quietly. You can stop making it worse. That is what you can do. Martha then outlined the legal steps. She would file a civil claim for costs incurred due to the attempted conveyance and for emotional distress tied to the guardianship petition. She would seek to recover attorney's fees and request that any future attempts to petition for control without new facts would be considered harassment. Daniel signed an acknowledgement of the boundaries and the civil claim notice. He left looking smaller than when he came in, but not deceitful. I did not hug him. I walked out with Martha and asked her to send me the schedule for the caregiver course to forward to him. She did so within the hour. 2 weeks later, the DA called to tell me that Peter had been arrested and arraigned. He pled not guilty at the first appearance, was released on bail, and was ordered to surrender his passport. The notary accepted a plea deal for improper notarization and agreed to cooperate. Tamsin received a summons. Her attorney negotiated to delay arraignment by a week. During that week, she called Daniel from a number he didn't recognize and left a message that sounded like a business voicemail, clipped and precise, asking him to meet without lawyers. He did not. He sent the voicemail to Martha, who forwarded it to the DA. Small restraint matters. At work, Tamsin was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation, due to violations of the company's ethics policy. There is a practical line that companies enforce when employees use personal relationships to gain access to finances. The firm where Claire worked called her in and asked pointed questions about why her name appeared in the DA's affidavits. She told them she had responded to a formal request from law enforcement and complied with whistleblower protections. They gave her a warning and reassigned her to a different client. She called me after and said, "It's not fair, but it's better than I expected." I told her I was proud of her. That word matters when it comes from someone who watched you count change at a kitchen table when you were 12. The arraignment for Tamsin drew a crowd because Harborfield is not large and the combination of real estate and scandal draws attention. I sat in the back with Martha and kept my eyes on the judge. Tamsin wore a gray suit and stood straight. The clerk read the charges. The DA outlined the evidence. Tamsin's attorney entered a plea of not guilty. Bail was set with conditions. She had to surrender her passport, avoid contact with witnesses including me, Miguel, and Liam, and stop any involvement in Seahaven LLC. The hearing ended quickly. Reporters waited outside, but I did not stop. Martha put her hand on my elbow and guided me through a side door because she knows I dislike cameras. That afternoon, the condo board posted a statement reminding residents not to engage with media in common spaces. The lobby felt orderly again. Restitution and repair moved more slowly. The registry, through the DA's motion, voided the fraudulent deed and restored title cleanly to me. I changed the locks and installed a door camera with Miguel's help. I set up new alerts at the credit union for any attempted changes to beneficiaries, and Anna personally called me to test each alert. I sat with Martha and redrafted my estate plan. I created a living trust with an independent trustee from the bank rather than a family member. I added a no-contest clause that triggers if any beneficiary petitions for control without a medical finding. I updated my healthcare proxy to designate my friend Dorothy from the library as the first proxy and Claire as the second. I wrote a simple letter of wishes for family that said clearly how I wanted decisions made if I could not make them. I sent copies to Martha and placed the originals in a safe deposit box with dual key access. I told Daniel I had done this and that he did not need copies. He accepted that without argument. That acceptance was a small step. There were ripples in the community. At the next PTA fundraiser, a few mothers who had laughed at the inventory joke at the party avoided my eyes. One of them, a woman named Cindy, stopped me near the raffle table and said, "I was wrong to laugh that day. I am sorry." It was easier to laugh than to speak up, and that says something about me I don't like. I thanked her for saying it. I did not offer to make her feel better. That is not my job. Liam's grandmother cornered me at the fish counter and told me she had told the church ladies, and they had told their cousins, and that was why the judge's words were already being quoted in barbershops. Guardianship is not a weapon, she recited with satisfaction. I nodded. Words travel fast when they make sense. Daniel moved out of the house for a time and stayed in a short-term rental near his office. He told me he needed space to think and that couples counseling had begun, with a schedule that made him look tired. Lucas asked me over grilled cheese why Daddy slept somewhere else, and I answered with the sentence Martha had taught me. Adults made mistakes and are working to fix them. He accepted it and asked if I could come to his soccer game. I said yes. That evening, on the sideline, another father slapped Daniel on the back and did not see me. Daniel's mouth tightened. He saw me watching and walked over. Thanks for coming, he said, his voice low. He looks for you in the bleachers. I said I would always be where my grandson could find me. That is a rule I set for myself and kept. The criminal case took months. The DA offered a plea to Tamsin, a conviction on attempted larceny and identity fraud, a suspended sentence, probation for 3 years, restitution of legal fees, and surrender of her state license for fiduciary work if she had any such designation. She balked, then accepted after Peter changed his plea to guilty on the uttering and conspiracy charges in exchange for a reduced sentence and an agreement to testify. He gave a statement laying out the plan, including the idea to use an imposter, the setup of the fake email, the use of a call forwarding service to intercept the bank's verification, and the formation of the LLC with money he had expected to gain back through property flips. He explained that Tamsin had introduced him to the UPS notary and had rehearsed the parking lot signing with the stand-in. The stand-in, it turned out, was a temp worker from one of his open houses who later recognized herself on social media when someone shared the arraignment headline and came forward with her own statement. She said she had been told it was a harmless paperwork test for an elderly client who had trouble writing in public and that she would be paid for her time. The DA agreed not to charge her in exchange for cooperation. The details were ugly and plain. There was no mystery left about who had initiated what. That clarity was bitter and useful. At sentencing, the judge permitted victim statements. I read mine from a single page. I described the cold shock of seeing my name on a deed I did not sign, the steady pressure of a guardianship petition that aimed to reduce my rights, the sleepless nights, the conversations with neighbors who stepped up, and the burned hours of my life spent fixing what others broke on purpose. I did not raise my voice. I did not look at Tamsin or Peter while I read. When I finished, I put the paper down and said one more sentence that was not on the page. I will not spend my remaining years guarding my front door from people who say they love me. The court has tools. Please use them. The judge sentenced Peter to a year in the county facility with 6 months to serve and the remainder suspended, plus restitution and community service teaching ethics at a trades program, which felt like a small piece of irony the court allowed itself. He sentenced Tamsin to 3 years of probation, 400 hours of community service with an elder services nonprofit, mandatory counseling, and a prohibition on acting as a fiduciary for any older adult. The notary lost his commission and paid a fine. These were not cinematic punishments. They were functional. That is what I wanted. The day after sentencing, I went to the library to volunteer as usual. Dorothy brought me a coffee and a new stack of returns, and we shelved quietly. At noon, the director asked if I would consider leading a monthly workshop on protecting finances in later life. I said yes. We named it the Tuesday Ledger Club because names matter, and I wanted something that sounded practical. 15 people came to the first meeting, including Mrs. Chin, who corrected me gently when I forgot a name. We covered how to set up alerts at banks, how to document any irregularity, how to find a reputable elder law attorney, how to treat notaries, how to avoid isolation that makes manipulation easier. Miguel came on his break and talked about how to say no at a front desk without being rude. Anna sent brochures and a promise that anyone from our building who walked into the credit union would be treated like someone with a history that mattered. Liam spoke briefly about how to store video files in more than one place. These details are small, they are also shields. People left with handouts and my phone number written at the top with the instruction to text before signing anything that made their stomach tighten. They did. I answered when I could. When I could not, I forwarded to Martha. At home, I needed to choose what to do with the trust beyond the structure. I had spent months fixing damage and wanted to decide where the tide of my life would go when I was no longer carrying it. I met with the bank trustee and said I wanted the trust to support Lucas's education through age 25, with conditions that he attend an accredited program or apprenticeship of his choosing, not dictated by parental pressure. I set aside a portion for the library's community programming with a note to continue the Tuesday Ledger Club after I was gone. I established a small fund in Mick's name for municipal interns to get paid for their summer work in the finance office, because unpaid internships are a door people without family money cannot walk through. I showed Daniel the summary page and told him this was firm. He read it without protest and said, "It sounds like you, and that is how it should be." After sentence, life has a way of becoming ordinary again. I repaired the crack in the bedroom ceiling that I had been ignoring for a year. I replaced a wobbly chair leg. I bought new dish towels. I started walking earlier in the mornings to avoid the heat and waved to the same man who sits on the seawall with a paperback. At the building's winter holiday gathering, people brought cookies, and I brought scones without raisins because Mrs. Chin would not forgive me otherwise. Miguel had been promoted to building operations manager, and he wore a tie his mother had bought him for the occasion. When someone toasted residents who make the building better, a few people turned and looked at me. I do not like the center of a room, but I nodded in acknowledgement and then excused myself to the kitchen to refill the coffee percolator because there are always dishes to wash. There were still awkward moments. At a school event, a mother asked if it was true that I had sent my own son to court. I answered, I went to court to stop a theft. The court decided who did the stealing. That ended the conversation. The following week, Daniel and I met at a diner that has not changed since he was a boy. He ordered pancakes and didn't eat them. He told me Tamsin had moved in with her sister while probation began and that their marriage was under review. He said he had started counseling and attended the caregiver course. He placed a certificate on the table as if proof of attendance could restore trust. I told him I was glad he went and that we would revisit everything again in 6 months. I set a calendar reminder. He looked at the ceiling and blinked backwater and said thank you. I did not promise forgiveness on a schedule. I promised presence with boundaries. Claire received a modest recognition at her firm during an Ethics Week presentation, a careful acknowledgement phrased so that no one had to say the word whistleblower into a microphone. She stopped by my condo afterward with a bouquet from the grocery store and asked if we could cook together like we did when she was little. We made soup and ate it at my table. She told me she had signed up to mentor 2 interns at her firm and that both of them reminded her of what numbers can allow if you use them properly. I told her that sometimes acting like the adult in a room starts earlier than you think. She asked if I would add her as a co-host for the Tuesday Ledger Club in the spring. I said yes. The DA closed the case files eventually, and the paperwork arrived in a packet with official stamps and signatures. I placed it in the folder with the injunction and the certified deed. I wrote one last line in my log, case concluded. Title clean. Boundary set. I put the log in the shoebox with Mick's letter and closed the lid. I did not lock it. There is no need to lock a box that holds a record and a promise. I found a new use for my time. On Thursdays, I help a woman in her 60s named Irene sort through a stack of letters her nephew left on her kitchen table that made her chest hurt. We sit at the same table every week, and I bring a folder with tabs, and we label things with dates and types so the stack turns into a file. She thanks me too much. I tell her she is doing the work. I am handing her the tabs. On Saturdays, I stand with Liam at the farmer's market booth he runs for his video business and talk to people who want to know how to hire a drone operator who follows rules. He grins and tells them he does paperwork now, thanks to a certain neighbor, and they laugh and buy packages. On Sundays, I go to the harbor and sit on the bench by the bronze fisherman and breathe. Sometimes I see Tamsin at a distance, on her way to meet her probation supervisor at the community center. She does not look in my direction. I do not run from the sight of her. She is part of this town now in a different way. That is not my problem to fix. One late afternoon in spring, Lucas showed up at my door with a school assignment about family history. He wanted to know how his grandfather met me. I told him the story without skipping the parts where we were tired and poor and loud. He asked if he could record me on his tablet for his project. I said yes. After he finished, he looked serious and asked if adults sometimes forget that people are not inventory. I winced and asked where he heard that word used that way. He said a kid at school had repeated something he heard his mother say months ago. I told him that adults say careless things when they are trying to sound funny or important, and that the remedy is not an argument but an action. If anyone ever calls you anything that makes you feel smaller, ask them to repeat it slowly, I told him. Then tell them you heard them and act in a way that shows them they are wrong. He nodded and wrote it down. I pretended not to notice the way his hand shook a little. People ask about forgiveness, as if it were a switch. In my life, it is a schedule with review dates. 6 months after the sentencing, Daniel and I met again. He brought me progress notes from counseling and a letter he had written without anyone prompting him to, apologizing for specific acts without making a list of reasons. He asked if we could try Sunday dinners again once a month with Lucas. I agreed to every other month and scheduled the first one. On that first dinner, he set the table before I arrived, and when I came in, he handed me the serving spoon without commentary. Later, he collected the plates and loaded the dishwasher without waiting for a cue. These are small things, and they are the only kind of things that matter now. I wrote down the date in my calendar as if it were a check that needed to clear. It did. By summer, the Tuesday Ledger Club had grown large enough that the library moved us to the community room. The credit union sponsored copies of a worksheet I developed that fit on one page and prompted people to list their accounts, set alerts, name a trustee, and write down who to call if something feels wrong. I kept the language simple and refused to use the words that make people feel stupid. We added a second page for people who wanted it that covered how to handle a relative who had stepped over a line without burning the entire family to the ground. At one session, a woman named Ria raised her hand and said she was relieved to hear me admit that I had missed early signs. I thought I had to be perfect to be safe, she said. I told her that perfection is not the requirement. Attention is. You do not avoid harm by never blinking. You avoid harm by keeping records and insisting on procedures even when someone calls you difficult. The last piece of this story is quiet. After the fall festival, I met with the building board and asked about starting a rotating check-in system for residents who live alone. Not a surveillance grid, just a weekly knock and a question. 3 volunteers signed up on the spot. We called it Thursday rounds because someone needed to write something on the whiteboard outside the mailboxes. The first week, Miguel handed out magnets with a little phone number printed on them that reached his desk. Residents put them on their refrigerators. No one made a speech. The building felt different without anyone saying why. This is what I learned. If lessons can be called that without sounding like a lecture, people will do what papers allow them to do unless someone insists that the paper be read aloud in a room that requires truth. If you feel yourself shrinking to make living easier for others, you can stop and write down the dates and speak them in order and ask for the rules to be followed. If you worry that allowing yourself to need help will make you weak, you can remember that sometimes help is a shield when the person offering it is paid to be your witness rather than tied to your dinner table. And if someone who shares your last name uses the words formal and safety to wrap a plan that benefits them, you can say no calmly and out loud and in writing and in court. If you want to know whether a person is on your side, watch what they do when you ask them to slow down until you can read. On the first anniversary of the guardianship hearing, I walked to the harbor and sat on the bench with the bronze fishermen. It was cool, and the air held the smell of salt and fried food from the small place on the corner. I did not think about revenge as a story people tell to feel better. I thought about the credit union teller who printed extra pages when I asked. I thought about the concierge who refused a stamp. I thought about a boy with a drone who does not cut corners. I thought about a niece who risked a reprimand to pull a file. I thought about a judge who said a sentence into a microphone that has been repeated in my town enough times that it no longer sounds like something from a courtroom. I went home and put the kettle on and opened the windows and sat with my back straight. The room did not feel bigger. It felt the right size. If you were sitting across from me at my kitchen table now, I would pour you a cup of tea and ask what you need to write down before you forget. I would hand you a pen that writes cleanly and a page with simple lines and tell you to start with the most recent date and move backward until you reach the first moment you let a small wrong go because you wanted a quiet afternoon. Then I would tell you to call someone whose job it is to listen, and I would remind you not to sign forms when your hands are shaking without asking someone to witness the shake. I cannot promise you that people will stop trying to make you small. I can promise you that the right paper spoken in the right room can turn them away at the door. On my refrigerator, between the magnet with Miguel's number and a photo of Lucas with a gap where his front teeth should be, I keep one small index card. It has 10 words on it that came from the last letter my husband wrote me, the only part one quote out loud because it is not flowery and it helps. I read it sometimes before bed when the day has too many edges. I am not telling you what it says because you will write your own and tape it up in your kitchen and know it by heart without showing anyone unless you want to. What matters is not the words on the card. What matters is that the card is there, and the drawer with the records is organized, and the neighbors know your name, and the door camera light blinks, and the kettle works, and the next person who knocks knows they will be met by someone who keeps her papers in order. I walked to Lucas's school concert last week with a bag of clementines for after and a copy of his program folded in my purse. He stood in the second row and looked for me and found me. Later, he asked if I would sign his program. I wrote my name carefully and added the date. He looked at it and smiled. That is the only signature that mattered that day. When I got home, I filed the program in a drawer labeled Keeps, and then I slept like a person who had told the truth under oath and won the right to keep her own keys.